If you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome back to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ryan Shekell. Welcome, Ryan.
Mads, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to join the show. I've listened to a bunch of episodes, and I love what you're doing to elevate managers.
Excellent. And I'm super excited as well because you have gone through a lot of this stuff yourself, and you've had some very interesting experiences. So I'm super excited to talk about this. But just before we get into it, as always, there's people around the world who don't know who you are yet. So would you mind giving a little bit of an introduction to who you are and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So I graduated college, and I didn't really have a lot of direction when I graduated. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I had a degree in education, so I became a 5th grade special education teacher in the United States. I'm from upstate New York, Rochester, New York, and I got a job in Atlanta, Georgia, teaching 5th grade. And it was an unbelievable experience. It was eye-opening, getting to a different part of my country, experiencing another culture within the United States, and just learning and being around other teachers, but also kids on a daily basis. And, I really enjoyed teaching, but there was something missing. And there was something about just the parents and the administration that I just couldn't wrap my head around, that I didn't love. So I wanted to get into business. And I ended up deciding to pursue a career in medical sales, specifically orthopedic surgical device sales. And I ended up getting a job, and I took over territory early on in my career. It was doing about $300,000 annual revenue in Atlanta, Georgia. And over the course of time, I ended up actually building that territory up to $10 million in annual sales and growing a large sales team underneath me to kind of help facilitate that growth. So it was a great journey from education into the corporate world. And that's kind of where I am today. I'm continuing that career, managing and now educating other managers and leaders on how to grow their own territories.
Excellent. That sounds like a lot of fun. So you've gone full circle from teacher to manager back to teacher.
Yeah, in a way I have. And it's funny because, a lot of what we do, and I think a lot of what your listeners will appreciate, is relationship building, right? And working with orthopedic surgeons is incredibly interesting. And one of the coolest things that I enjoy about it is that they're so much smarter than me. So on a daily basis, while I'm selling and teaching others to sell and manage, I'm learning so much. And it's always a running joke. And if any of my surgeons listen to this, they will know I bring it up all the time in the operating room. And I say that being a special education teacher was the perfect practice for dealing with orthopedic surgeons. And we all kind of laugh and joke, and ultimately they'll look back and say, well, what do you mean by that, Ryan? And I say, well, you guys are all high energy. You don't like to listen, and it's impossible to teach you anything. And, they all kind of laugh. But what I've realized is education was a perfect segue into managing and selling. And if you know anything about the special education system in the United States, when a student needs special education services, we create a document, and that document is called an IEP, an individualized education plan. And that translates so well into sales and management, because what that document does is it takes into consideration the way the person you're trying to teach or manage thinks, right? So you're looking at that individual, you're looking at their learning style, you're looking at their personality type, You're looking at everything they need to either perform a task or be successful. And then you're creating an individual plan for that individual to achieve the goals that are set out for it. So while it's a big joke in a lot of ways for me, it's actually a great tool to individualize my management style and my sales techniques for the individual that I'm working with.
Yeah, I like that. And I've seen and worked for multiple people in my management career that have a background in teaching. And sometimes when I say that teaching can be very similar to management, typically what people say, oh, well, your staff is not children. And the whole point is, no, I know that. That's not at all what I'm hinting at. But it's the mindset you have as a teacher, where you're constantly trying to lift people up, constantly trying to help people, not just tell them what to do, because that's a problem many managers have, but actually teach them how to learn it, teach them how to gain skills, teach them how to outgrow and very often outgrow you. I mean, my absolute favorite with management is when I have a team that are individually smarter than me in various areas of the business, and they can all outsmart me in some way, right? Like, I love that about management, because when you build a team and when they become sub-expert in their own areas, and they're better than you, that makes you less needed. And this is one of the things that, for me, most managers and most business owners are missing. They think they have to be the center of attention all the time, but in reality, their goal is to be the opposite, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the ultimate ego problem, right? Because if your ego is so large that you require being the best and having all of the recognition for success within your company, then that's a massive problem. Because if your ego is telling you that you need to be the one getting all the accolades and the rewards, well, then the people underneath you, the people supporting you, the people that you're supporting, they're not going to be as driven as you would hope to have them be. So my goal, just like you're saying, Mads, is if I'm leading someone, if I'm managing someone, my goal, my job is not done until that individual or that team is more competent than I am. So I'm always looking, and that starts in the hiring process. And I think we should always be identifying people with skills that work well with ours, but also skills that supersede our skills. And we should be looking for people to replace us in every single person that we hire, because ultimately you really are looking for someone to replace you. Because when you replace yourself, you're allowing yourself to kind of detach from that particular task or position and then perform a more important position of overseeing that team that you've now created.
Yes, and that is what I say. Normally, people have the opposite concern. So most managers I work with is like, oh, but if someone knows how to do my job, then they can just fire me. I'm like, they could, or what happens in 99.99999% of the cases, instead they could promote you, right? Mm-hmm. And what I said is turn it around as well, right? You're most likely not going to be promoted if your team and your business unit crumbles if they remove you, right?
Yeah, and it starts from the top too, right? Like, you have to understand, define, and articulate the purpose and mission of your company. Because if you're leading from the top, and let's just start there. If you're leading from the top, you have a mission in mind, whether you own the company, whether you are in the executive management capacity in the company. First and foremost, your priority is achieving the mission or your overall overarching goal of the company. And no one is going to be more invested in that mission than the owner or the executives, because they're the ones really pushing to achieve like full success and scale that business so that that mission is achieved at the highest possible level. So if that mission is at the forefront of everything a company does, specifically from a leadership role, then as you kind of go down the hierarchy of management, that mission should be articulated as clearly as possible so that everyone within the company understands the direction and the expectation set forth for them. Because again, no one is going to be as bought into the mission and the purpose as the owner of the company.
Yeah, totally agree on that. Totally agree on that. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So you work with a lot of younger people and training them to run their own show, basically. Is that right?
Yeah. So the way medical device sales works, and it's adapted a lot in the 15 years that I've been kind of involved in the industry. But when I started, it was kind of like the analogy would be, it was like the wild, wild west. There's a handful of reps, and we were all out with our products, just showing everyone everything, growing like gangbusters, and selling whatever we could. Well, that was all well and good until you really needed to not just sell, but manage the business you've created. And as we grew, we had to provide the same level of service that we were providing sales. So ultimately what we would end up doing is you'd have a senior sales rep, and they would bring in an associate sales rep, and they would teach that associate kind of how to do what they did. That way they could actually finally take a vacation after years of nothing. And eventually, as you continue to scale, you start creating a small team underneath you. And the way healthcare works specifically in the United States, and I don't want to speak for around the world because it is different everywhere, but within the United States, it's very regional. It's a big country, and the reimbursement for surgical supplies changes based on the state, based on the region, based on the hospital system, or even down to the ship to account. So it's very specific, the way you sell and the way you manage a territory in New York compared to California, or Louisiana compared to Minnesota. So a company that is able to tailor a small business, a small regional business, is going to be positioned much stronger because of their flexibility within the market that they manage than a larger multinational or national company can that just kind of oversees everything. So the way we work, and I love this in terms of considering a similar management style, the way my company works is we have a parent company, it's a manufacturer, and then we have agencies or distributorships all throughout the country. So it allows each distributorship or agency kind of the flexibility to work within the structure provided to achieve the goals that are set forth for it. So my role currently in our agency is to help facilitate the growth of all of the younger sales reps that are now coming out of college and graduating with their business or management or education degree to come in and really learn the healthcare sales business, to understand the sales process, to prioritize the service and the education of surgeons, and to really grow and manage a business that is their own small niche business within the territory that they're assigned. The way we like to do it is we say, if you're coming in brand new, we're going to train you, and then within a year, we would love for you to have a small handful of accounts that you manage like it's your own 1099, which is a sales, or that's a independent contractor tax code in the United States, like it's your own small business without any kind of oversight from anyone else. So it's almost as if I am training business owners once they come out of college to do medical sales.
Well, it does sound a lot of fun for sure. I think in terms of the training and in terms of methodology and so on, like what's your focus? Like, how do you motivate managers, and how do you how do you sort of drive the attitude into people, or the mindset that you feel is needed from a management standpoint?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think you have to exemplify it. And the way that I love to train people is I think it's important, we call it like a ride along. And I think the first 3 months on the job, because the learning curve is so high, and specifically in medicine and surgery, if you do make a mistake on the service side, the implications are high, right? There's a patient on the table and they could be injured or potentially die if you do something wrong or if you forget something. So because the cost is so high, we like to do about 3 months of on the job training where you're shadowing a more experienced rep. And as you kind of go through that process, you're learning the surgery, so you're learning the procedure or the product you represent, and you're also meeting everybody you need to know. So you're meeting the surgeon, you're meeting the staff, you're meeting administration, purchasing. So you're now being introduced to all the key decision makers within the process, and you're cultivating a relationship, because I truly feel like the most important part of any job, not just sales, not just management, not just ownership, the most important part of any job is your reputation in terms of building trust, having integrity, and being authentic. So I think it's really important to take someone under your wing when they start and to exemplify all the values that you have within the company, so that they not only hear about it from you, but they see you going through the process of continuing to cultivate the relationships you have. So 3 months of that. And then, I think you start to take the training wheels off, and you give some flexibility to the younger rep, and you say, okay, here's a task that I'm looking for you to complete. You need to study, you need to prepare, and you need to execute this task. And then it's a small task, and you give them the opportunity to succeed or fail, and both are good. Whether they succeed or fail, I think that's a positive experience. If you succeed, you have now learned that you're capable of doing the job. And if you fail, well, good. Now you've learned what it takes to be successful based on what didn't work. And look, we all fail so much. And, it's funny because you and I were talking before we got started, and we were talking about failure within business, within the industry. And I truly believe, failure happens. But I think in my industry, what I've seen more often than not, failure is a direct result of overconfidence. Because what happens with overconfidence is that you refuse or you fail to understand the preparation that needs to go in. And I look back on one of my biggest failures, and I had this hospital system that needed new equipment, and I had a great relationship with all the surgeons. We were buddies. We would go out for a drink. We would hang out and go see sporting events, and to me, it was a shoo-in. I thought this deal was a done deal, to the point where I brought all my equipment in. We trialed it. It went phenomenal. And then all of a sudden, I get this call saying, "Hey, Ryan, can you come in so we could talk about your deal with the CFO?" And I'm thinking, all right, cool. They're gonna give me a check. Like, this is good. And I walk in, and as I'm walking into this conference room, I see 4 guys in suits and a full-on, briefcase presentation walking out. And one of them kind of looks at me and smiles, and I recognize him as one of my major competitors. And I'm thinking, these guys weren't even involved in the trial that we had. So I walk into the room. I'm alone. I don't have a manager. I don't have a proposal. I had sent it over email, but I didn't have anything with me. And I completely blew it with the CFO because I was overconfident, and I did not prepare. And I took for granted that I thought the deal was done, and I was there to collect the invoice. And to this day, I never assume that something's done until the invoice and PO's in hand. And it was just this overconfidence that I have that now I go into every business proposal scared that I've already lost the deal. And I think it's a great transition in the way that I thought about making a presentation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I tend to look at it as in most cases, I think failure comes from lack of action, right? I think when I look at many managers, many business owners, and so on, I think a lot of the time, a lot of the failures I see at least really come from people sometimes being scared of taking action, or sometimes being scared of taking the next step that's needed, right? So I totally see where you're coming from. Which
Yeah, that it's funny you say that though, because that's the opposite, right? So what I'm saying is, there's too much ego, and people sometimes fail because they're overconfident. And what you're saying is, people don't have the confidence to pull the trigger and take action. And it's interesting that it's kind of like this opposing viewpoint, but I can see it from both ways. I think you're absolutely right.
I think, well, at least again, many people. So people are different by nature, right? And some people definitely take action, and probably some take a lot of action. But I think most of the failures I've seen, not necessarily myself personally, but most of the failures that I see, particularly when training managers and working with business owners, it's really the lack of confidence, the lack of ability to really push themselves and really push through something, because it's usually due to fear of some kind, or it's usually due to, we need to be 1,000% correct, and they're wanting to perfect everything. And I think fundamentally, like, I think that is a bigger challenge in what I see, at least.
Yeah,
but yeah, I
well,
can
so
totally relate.
let's unpack that for a second, because that's a really interesting perspective. Because you kind of said two different things, right? So you say there's a lack of confidence, but you've also said that people are paralyzed by analysis, and they might not be ready to make a decision because they feel like they need more information. I'm curious to know, because I know that you've worked with a lot of different businesses. Is there like a personality type that you would attribute to the people who fail because they don't take action?
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, probably most personality types, I see it happening pretty frequently. Uh, Definitely, I mean, I use DISC like crazy. So personality-wise, there's pretty much anything other than these tend to occasionally be stifled. Obviously, you have the other side of the coin as well, where people take too much action, do a lot of random things, but never really follow through, right? But at least sort of in the tech online space, there's a lot of people who are, very detail oriented, and who's really, they don't like making decisions if they're not 100% sure of the outcome, and so on, right? And particularly in the sales area, I mean, I see them getting stifled so often in the sales area, where they're kind of, one, they're not good at selling because they sometimes don't understand the value they provide, or they don't understand like the pricing and so on. So they often, like, they're not comfortable with what they're selling. They're not comfortable with their own product, and that leads to inaction, because when you're not comfortable, if you feel you're tricking someone into buying your stuff, like, that makes it so much harder to sell, right?
Yeah. So two things you said. Two things. So the one thing is, and I completely agree with you on this. If you're talking about, and I know that a lot of your listeners are small business owners, generally, and I don't want to speak specifically. Generally, a lot of small business owners have more of like a captain or a like an executive personality, and or entrepreneur personality. There's so many names for these personality types, right? And a lot of the characteristics of that type of personality is this analysis, execution, attention to detail, large visionary thinking. And I can see a lot of people with that personality overanalyzing situations and not being able to move. The interesting thing to me is that you said you also see it in sales, because the one thing that I've observed in sales, and I've done a lot of sales training with a lot of sales reps, and the majority, and I don't want to say the vast majority, but let's call 60% of the sales reps that I have seen and worked with have a personality. A lot of times it's called like a talker, right? So the way their mind works is that they work through problems through communicating first to understand kind of what they're thinking. So, their mouth is working a mile a minute, and you might hear that from me sometimes. And it's hard sometimes for my brain to catch up to what I'm actually saying, because this pause and silence, sometimes I feel like I have to fill it with noise, right? So I have to take a step back and say, okay, I'm talking too much. But I also think sales reps oftentimes have the same problem. And again, that's that talking too much mentality, to where you've now made a mistake by not paying attention to the details and maybe assuming something that you shouldn't have assumed. So I think that's a really important kind of thing to understand, in terms of just understanding different personality types and how they may be prone to failure, and kind of trying to nip that before it actually happens.
Yeah, and I think as well, like when you're looking at sales in particular, right? I think a lot of people, when people talk a lot, there's a great balance between talking a lot and being confident about it, and talking a lot making you seem nervous, right? So I've definitely seen my fair share of salespeople that just can't shut up, and it really just make them look like, they're trying to push something down your throat, or they're afraid of letting you speak, kind of thing. And that, at least to me, that have made them come across extremely nervous, right? So I think you're right. There's a very, very fine balance, right?
I couldn't agree more. And one of the first things I do when I bring someone into the operating room and meet a surgeon for the first time, the very first thing I tell them is, don't lie. Don't make anything up. If you don't know the answer, the correct answer is, I don't know, right? Because as soon as you lose that trust, exactly what you're saying, if you're talking too much, you're bound to be caught up in maybe not a lie or a misdirection, but you may just say something that you don't know. So my first piece of advice is always, you're only as good as your reputation. Please, if you don't know the answer to something, don't make it up. It's okay in the operating room in a high stress situation to say, you know what? I don't have that answer. Let me call someone and I will get it for you. And that will earn so much more trust than sometimes even knowing it in the first place, because it shows that you have the humility to get them what they need, and put out to the world that you don't know everything. So yeah, that's always my first piece of advice.
And I think this goes as well for many business owners, because a lot of business owners, like I've worked with so many people, and when they talk with their staff, they feel ashamed if they don't know the answer to a question, or they feel like, oh, I'm the boss, I'm the owner, I should know. And they're like, they either make up stupid excuses or something like that. And I'm like, no, tell your staff, like actually tell your staff, I don't know. Because again, it's not just building trust and rapport. It shows them you're human. It shows them that, you actually need them, because there is stuff you don't know. You're not this all-knowing oracle that's the center of the world and all that good stuff, right?
Yeah, I love that, and especially for young managers. And you get this question a lot, and because we oftentimes like promote from within, and I think that we try to give young representatives an opportunity to grow into managers. And one of the first things that inevitably happens when you promote a young person into a management role is they feel like they should know everything that like a more experienced manager knows. So they come in guns a-blazing, and it's, we got to do this and you got to do this, and I need this. And as soon as there's pushback, as soon as there's a question of what needs to be done, they'll just take it on themselves and make a decision. Whereas you actually build more equity with your team if you offer them the chance to contribute to these large decisions, and you say, hey, I don't have the answer to this, but you know what? You guys have the better perspective, having been in these positions for longer, having more experience, having understand understood the process in the company longer, I'd be thrilled to get your perspective on what your opinion should be to do this. And that does multiple things. It A, gets trust in those employees that you care about them. So now they know that you value them and their opinion. But it also allows you to kind of not steal their ideas, but benefit from their experience, right? I mean, it's true that if you can sit in a room and listen to 10 people offer up an opinion, well, your perspective is going to be that much stronger, and you're going to be able to make a much more informed decision by involving others in the process. So I think it's a really important lesson for young managers or new managers to truly understand that you don't have to have the answers. A lot of times the manager's role isn't to have the answers. It's to collect the information necessary and to make the most informed decision.
Yeah, my favorite way of saying it is that the manager's responsibility is to find the people who can make those good decisions. Because again, I don't necessarily see the manager's role per se as being the one making the decisions, right? Like as a manager, I love giving the responsibility for different area of the business and different area of what I manage to the individuals working for me. Because often they're in the weeds. They know the place better. They know the piece of business better. And they are often better at making those decisions. And so I love delegating responsibility wherever I possibly can.
Yeah, it's it's exemplified a lot of times in sales because to switch that mindset from sales to managing is difficult. And you'll find oftentimes new managers will say, well, I'm still given a quota, right? Like our young managers say, okay, I'm given a quota. I have to hit a number. The easiest way for me to hit a number is to sell everything I need to sell because they understand that that's what they've done for years, right? That's what they're comfortable with. That's what they know. But that's a very short-sighted idea because if all they do is go over their team's head and make a big sale without them, well, they now didn't include their team in learning how to do exactly what they need them to do. And that experience has passed, and it's unfortunate. So it's really difficult for, like I said, a young manager to kind of take a step back and say, instead of making a sale, I'm going to be responsible for educating my team on the process that I would typically use to make that sale happen. So you're absolutely right. I truly believe a manager's job, especially in sales, a manager's job, while they may have a quota, they're not responsible for the quota. They're responsible for the people that are going to hit the quota for you.
Yeah. So, and again, this is not just in sales, by the way. I think the number one thing I work with most people and most managers is changing the mindset from an individual contributor to a leader and a manager, right? And those mindset, like that mindset shift is the number one biggest difference between being an individual contributor and being a manager, right? And even business owner, like that mindset piece. Like I have a whole training on leadership and management, and honestly, a lot of it is helping people move that mindset, change that mindset, getting it away from I will, I do, I anything to how will I encourage someone to do it on our behalf? Because it's not just, I mean, sales-wise, it's not just that if you go and do it, but the whole thing is your time is better spent educating your team so that they can make the sales. Because if you make them, again, you only have 24 hours a day, right? You only have 24 hours. And there's only so many big sales you can possibly make by yourself. But if you spend your time focused on growing and developing your team, they might not be able to land the big deals you can right now. But if you keep growing and developing them, they will turn into and they will become able to do so. And if you have a team of 10 people who can make big sales versus yourself, even if they are only 70% effective, they can still make a lot more sales than you ever will, right?
Yeah, I was speaking to someone a couple weeks ago, and this guy's name is Scott Olson, and he worked in the FBI for a long time, and he ended up developing a leadership course. and we were talking about leadership, and he said, I hope I don't ruin this quote because I don't have it written down or anything. He said, leadership is a scalability problem, and you become a leader when you run out of individual bandwidth. And I think it's a really cool thing to think about, because it's exactly what you just said, Mads. If you run out of bandwidth in terms of what you can do individually, well, now you need to bring someone else into your company, into your responsibility, to help expand that bandwidth to achieve more. So every time you run out of bandwidth individually, now a group of 2, now a group of 3, so on and so forth, you're scaling your bandwidth as a leader to achieve a higher quantity of that mission, that purpose, that whatever your company is set to do or provide. You need to scale it by increasing bandwidth underneath you. And I think at its core, that truly is what leadership is and management is about. And it was really interesting to hear that from someone that's worked in the FBI he actually developed the leadership course for the FBI. And I thought that was a really profound insight.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, it's been an amazing conversation. So thank you again very much for joining me here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Mads. I really appreciate it.
If people are eager to get in contact with you, Ryan, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So similar to yourself, I have a podcast. It's a leadership management podcast. It's focused on achieving your goals through overcoming adversity. So it's kind of a niche little topic. You could call it self-development, but I really like the business aspect and the management aspect of it. It's called the Every Breath Counts podcast, and it's everywhere where you stream, and you can find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and it's Ryan Shekell, as well as Every Breath Counts podcast. And look, if you like Mads' podcast and you appreciate insights from successful people and you want to optimize your mind, your body, your career, and your life, then shoot on over to Apple, Spotify, wherever. Download Every Breath Counts podcast and give it a listen. And, like it, do whatever you want to do with it. But, I think, Mads, we have a very similar mission and kind of mentality, and it was great kind of volleying with you about management and leadership, and I really appreciate it, man.
Awesome. And to the audience, thank you very much for hanging in this far. We'll be back again next week. Have a good time.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.